April 23rd, 2007. 0340 hours. Mortar rounds landing closer every 90 seconds. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen pressed against a mud brick wall in Diyala Province, Iraq. 12 soldiers from 1st Battalion, 12th Infantry Regiment trapped with him. No backup. Radio full of static. Battalion said wait for quick reaction force. 20 minutes out. Another mortar hit. 60 meters short. Dust and smoke rolled through empty streets. That's when his interpreter pulled out a Nokia phone and started dialing. Chen grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Making a phone call. Any officer would call it reckless. Radio discipline prohibited unsecured calls during contact. It could compromise their position, alert insurgents, trigger ambushes. But Kareem al-Dulaimi made 47 phone calls that night. By dawn, the mortars stopped. The village elder emerged, and a hostile town of 3,000 people began turning from enemy territory to reluctant ally because one translator understood that in Iraq, family connections mattered more than firepower. Kareem al-Dulaimi was not born to be a soldier. He was born in 1973 outside Bakuba, Diyala Province, where his father Hassan repaired engines in a 2-room shop, generators, water pumps, trucks that broke down on Highway 5. His mother Aisha sold vegetables in the Thursday market. Working-class family, normal life in a region that had seen too many wars. Kareem learned to diagnose carburetor problems by sound, to feel when bearings were failing. Steady hands, patience for mechanical puzzles. His father told him once while they rebuilt a sand-seized generator, every machine is a system. You can't fix one part without understanding how it connects to everything else. Years later, that sentence would save 200 lives. When Saddam fell in 2003, Kareem was 30, still repairing engines, still in Bakba. The Americans arrived with promises, reconstruction, democracy, schools. He spoke passable English, learned from bootleg satellite TV and a tattered textbook. When 1st Infantry Division set up FOB Warhorse, they needed interpreters. The pay was $700 per month, more than 6 months at the shop. He applied. They hired him. The other interpreters were younger, more fluent, college-educated. Kareem stumbled over military acronyms, asked soldiers to repeat themselves, wrote translations slowly in a worn notebook. The soldiers called him Pops. Some meant it affectionately. Others didn't hide their impatience. But Kareem did something different. He kept his Nokia phone charged, kept a list of numbers, cousins, former customers, friends of his father, teachers from childhood. When patrols went to new villages, he quietly asked locals, "Who is your elder? Your imam? Your sheikh?" Then later, he'd call people he knew. "Do you know anyone in that village? Anyone who knows the elder?" He built a map in his head, not of roads and buildings, but of relationships. Who was married to whom? Which families had feuds going back decades? Which sheikhs hated al-Qaeda, and which feared them too much to resist? The soldiers didn't understand. To them, it looked like socializing. "Wasting time," one lieutenant told him. "We're here to clear objectives, not make friends." Kareem nodded, kept his phone in his pocket, kept calling. By early 2007, Diyala Province had become one of Iraq's most violent regions. Al-Qaeda in Iraq used the province as a staging ground for attacks into Baghdad, 40 kilometers southwest. The Diyala River Valley provided cover. Agricultural fields, concealed weapons caches. Mixed Sunni-Shia population meant sectarian violence layered on top of insurgent operations. American forces were fighting 2 wars, conventional counterinsurgency against organized cells, and a social war for civilian loyalty. If a village cooperated with Americans, al-Qaeda murdered the elder's family. If they supported insurgents, the Iraqi government cut off electricity, food rations, medical supplies. Most villages chose survival. They told Americans nothing, hid insurgents when threatened, evacuated before operations and returned after shooting stopped. This wasn't cowardice. This was calculation. Americans came for a day, maybe a week. Al-Qaeda lived in the next town and would return the moment soldiers left. The conventional approach was clear hostile villages by force, surround the area, search house by house, detain military-age males, destroy weapons caches, hand control to Iraqi security forces. It was doctrine. It was S.O.P., and it accomplished almost nothing. Because by the time soldiers left, elders had learned one lesson. Americans cannot be trusted to stay. Anyone who helps them will be marked for death. If this pattern continued, Diyala province would remain insurgent territory indefinitely. Every village an enemy. Every patrol facing IEDs, snipers, mortars fired from civilian areas where return fire meant international condemnation. Something had to change, but no one knew what. The patrol had been routine until the mortars started. April 22nd, mid-afternoon. Staff Sergeant Chen's squad rolled out of FOB Warhorse in 3 M1114 Humvees, headed northeast toward a village called Al-Hadid, the Iron, named for blacksmiths who'd worked there a century ago. Intelligence reported the village medical clinic was treating wounded insurgents, possibly Al-Qaeda cell members operating near Bakba city limits. The mission: establish contact with the village elder, request permission to inspect the clinic, offer medical supplies in exchange for cooperation, a soft approach to gather intelligence without triggering armed resistance. Chen had done a dozen of these. They almost never worked. The elder would refuse to meet, or agree and provide useless information, or demand payment headquarters wouldn't authorize. Then the patrol would leave, insurgents would return, village would remain hostile. But orders were orders. They reached Al-Hadid at 1600 hours. The streets emptied the moment Humvees appeared. Windows shuttered, doors closed. Not a single person visible. The silence had weight, oppressive and watchful. Specialist Rodriguez scanned rooftops through his M240B's optic. Nothing moved. Kareem climbed out of the second Humvee, adjusted his oversized vest, walked toward the nearest house. Knocked. No answer. Called out in Arabic. The door opened slightly. An old woman peered through the gap, eyes wide. Kareem spoke quietly for 30 seconds. She shook her head, retreated, slammed the door. No luck, Kareem reported. Chen tried 3 more houses. Same result. No one would admit knowing where the elder lived, wouldn't even confirm his name. The village wasn't just uncooperative, it was terrified. At 1730 hours, the first mortar landed 200 meters west in an empty field. Seconds later, a second round hit closer. The patrol took cover behind Humvees. Chen radioed battalion. Taking indirect fire. Grid NK 8734 2156. Requesting QRF standby. Battalion responded. Hold position. QRF is 20 minutes out. Do not return fire unless you identify the firing position. The third mortar landed 60 meters away. That's when Kareem pulled out his phone. Chen grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Making a phone call. You can't do that. Radio discipline. This is not a military radio. Kareem pulled his arm free gently. And I am not calling the enemy. Chen had no orders covering this. Technically, interpreters were civilians contracted to the military. They didn't follow the same communication protocols. But letting him make unsecured calls during contact felt wrong. Dangerous. A breach of something fundamental. Who are you calling? My cousin's husband's brother. He knows the imam in this village. Another mortar screamed overhead. Landed 40 meters closer. Shrapnel pinged off the Humvee's armor. Rodriguez swung his M240B toward the sound. Nothing to shoot. Just empty buildings and dust. Kareem spoke rapidly in Arabic. Urgent, but controlled. Not shouting. Not pleading. Explaining something. Reasoning through a problem, the way Chen had seen him work through engine repairs at the FOB. Methodical. Step by step. He hung up. Dialed another number. Kareem. We need to move. No. If we move, they will follow us. If we stay, I can stop this. Chen stared at him. The translator, quiet, overlooked Kareem, who stumbled over military acronyms, was making a decision that contradicted every tactical instinct. You don't stay in a position taking indirect fire. You maneuver. You find cover. You suppress the enemy or withdraw. But something in Kareem's voice stopped him. Not confidence exactly. Certainty. Chen keyed his radio. All elements. Hold position. Maintain 360 security. Kareem made another call. What happened over the next 4 hours would defy every principle of modern military communications. Kareem didn't call the village elder. He didn't have the elder's number. That would have been pointless anyway. Elders in hostile villages didn't answer calls from interpreters working with Americans. That's how people got killed. Instead, Kareem called his cousin Majid, who lived 15 kilometers away in Bagba city. Majid's wife was from a family with relatives in Al-Hadid. Kareem explained, "Americans at village edge, mortars firing, patrol trapped, need to speak with elder, but elder won't come out." Majid said he'd call his wife's uncle. Kareem waited. The phone felt slick with palm sweat. He counted seconds. 30. 60. Another mortar landed, 100 meters east now. Insurgents adjusting fire, walking rounds toward the patrol's position. His phone buzzed. Majid's text, "Uncle will call the elder's nephew." Kareem didn't wait. Dialed another number. This one belonged to a man named Rashid, who'd brought his generator to Kareem's father's shop in 2002. Rashid lived in a village north of Al-Hadid. "Do you know anyone in Al-Hadid? Anyone connected to the families there?" Rashid said yes. His son was married to a woman whose brother lived in Al-Hadid. "Can you call the brother? Tell him Americans are being attacked, but they don't want to fight. They came to talk. They have medical supplies. But someone is firing mortars and Americans can't talk while being shot." Rashid said he'd try. Kareem hung up, dialed a third number. A teacher he'd known in school, now retired, living 20 kilometers west. The teacher had no connection to Al-Hadid that Kareem knew of, but he asked anyway. "Do you know anyone in Al-Hadid?" The teacher thought for a moment. "My wife's cousin married someone from there. I can call my wife." "Please." 3 phone calls. 3 chains of connection spreading outward through family networks, like water seeping through cracked concrete. Each call led to another call. Each person contacted someone else, explained the situation in different words, passed the message forward through bloodlines and marriages and old friendships. Kareem wasn't calling the elder directly because that would be seen as pressure, as a threat. Instead, he was activating the invisible network connecting every person in Diyala province, the system of family obligations, social debts, and communal responsibility that ran deeper than politics or ideology. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Every machine is a system. You can't fix one part without understanding how it connects to everything else." This was the same principle. The village wasn't a single point on a map. It was a node in a network. If you wanted to reach the elder, you didn't go through the front door. You went through the family. Each connection created leverage. Not the leverage of threats or payments, the leverage of social obligation. If Majid's wife's uncle vouched for the Americans, the elder's nephew couldn't ignore that without dishonoring the uncle's family. If Rashid's son's wife's brother confirmed the Americans weren't attacking, that information came from someone the village trusted. The network enforced itself through reputation, through honor, through the understanding that betraying a family connection meant damaging relationships that extended far beyond this one village, this one night. Kareem was weaponizing something the military didn't understand and couldn't replicate. 1,400 years of tribal social structure adapted to modern cell phones. Chen watched Kareem work with growing confusion and fascination. The translator stood with his back against the Humvee, phone pressed to ear, speaking in rapid bursts of Arabic. He'd hang up, wait 30 seconds, dial again. Sometimes he sent text messages, thumbs moving quickly across the cheap keypad. Other times he just listened, nodding, saying, "Na'am, na'am, yes, yes," then explaining something in return. The mortars kept falling, but the pattern was changing. Still close, 50 meters, 40 meters, but the rate of fire slowed. 1 round every 5 minutes instead of 1 every 2, as if the mortar team was waiting for something. Rodriguez called down from the turret. "Sergeant, I got movement. 2 men, rooftop, 200 meters northeast." Chen raised his rifle, scanning through his ACOG, 2 figures in civilian clothes, neither holding weapons. They stood still, watching the patrol. One held a phone to his ear. "Hold fire," Chen ordered. "They're not armed." Kareem glanced at the rooftop, kept dialing. At 1850 hours, over an hour into this insanity, Kareem's phone rang. He answered, listened. His face remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture, a slight relaxation in his shoulders. He hung up and turned to Chen. The elder's nephew will come out in 10 minutes. He wants to talk. How do you know he's not setting up an ambush? Because my cousin's wife's uncle vouched for you. The nephew knows that if Americans are killed, his uncle's family will be dishonored. He cannot allow that. Chen stared at him. You just weaponized his family's reputation. Kareem nodded. Yes, the nephew appeared at 19:02 hours. He walked down the center of the street, both hands visible, no weapon. Young, maybe 25, wearing a gray dishdasha and sandals. He stopped 10 meters from the patrol, called out in Arabic. Kareem stepped forward, hands open. They spoke for 3 minutes. Chen couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the rhythm. Negotiation, reassurance, the careful dance of men who didn't trust each other but needed something from one another. Kareem turned back. He says the mortars are not from the village. They're from al-Qaeda fighters who came 2 days ago, using the village as a base, threatening families. The elder wants them gone. But if he cooperates with Americans, al-Qaeda will kill his sons. So what does he want? He wants you to promise you'll stay for 3 days. Not just visit and leave. Stay. Set up a patrol base in the village. Protect it long enough that al-Qaeda believes it's not worth returning. Chen keyed his radio. Relayed the request to battalion. The response took 5 minutes. He could hear the debate crackling in the background. Officers arguing about resources, force protection, whether they could commit a squad to a village they didn't control. Finally, approved. 3 days. Established temporary patrol base. Report daily. Chen looked at Kareem. We're staying. Kareem translated. The nephew nodded slowly, turned, walked back toward the houses. At 19:15 hours, the mortars stopped. Over the next 22 hours, Kareem made 44 more phone calls. He called everyone he could think of with any connection to Al-Hadid or surrounding villages. Explained the same thing each time. Americans are staying in the village for 3 days, not attacking. Not searching houses, just staying. The elder has agreed. Families are safe. He called his cousin Majid again. Tell your wife's uncle to spread the word. Tell him to call other elders. Tell them Al-Hadid is trying something new. He called Rashid with a generator. Can you ask your son's wife's brother to talk to shopkeepers in Al-Hadid? Tell them Americans will buy supplies, bread, bottled water, fuel, pay in cash. They need to see we're not here to destroy. He called the retired teacher. Can you ask the imam in your village to mention Al-Hadid in Friday prayers? Say they're trying a different path and need God's protection. Each call was brief, specific, pragmatic. Kareem wasn't asking for favors. He was building a structure, layer by layer, call by call. Each person he contacted became a node in the network, passing information forward, vouching for American intentions, creating social pressure for cooperation. He tracked every conversation in his worn notebook, who he called, who they called next, what they promised to do, drew lines connecting names, family groups, villages. It looked like a circuit diagram, the kind his father used to sketch when designing generator systems. Current flowing through wires, connecting components, completing a circuit. By midnight, the circuit was complete. The next morning, April 23rd, 0700 hours, the village elder walked out of his house. Sheikh Hamid al-Shatri, 62 years old, gray beard, walking with a cane from an old injury, traditional robes and white keffiyeh. His nephew walked beside him, along with 2 other men, bodyguards or witnesses. Kareem met them at the perimeter edge. They spoke in Arabic for 15 minutes. Chen watched from 20 meters away, listening to negotiation cadence. Kareem's tone respectful but direct. The sheikh listened more than he spoke, occasionally nodding, occasionally shaking his head. Finally, Kareem waved Chen over. He wants to make a deal. He'll tell you where the al-Qaeda fighters are hiding, names of local men helping them. But he has 3 conditions. What conditions? First, you don't arrest anyone from his family. Even if they helped al-Qaeda, they were forced. Second, you don't damage the mosque or school. Third, you stay for 7 days, not 3. He needs time to prove to everyone he made the right choice. Chen keyed his radio again. This time, the response was faster. 7 days approved. Conditions accepted. Get the intelligence. The sheikh spoke for 20 minutes. Kareem translated everything. The al-Qaeda cell consisted of 6 fighters hiding in a house 400 meters north of village center. They'd planted IEDs on the road to Bakba, planning to hit convoys tomorrow morning. They were forcing local men to dig fighting positions outside the village. They'd threatened to bomb the clinic if the elder cooperated with Americans. Chen passed the information to battalion. Within 2 hours, a platoon from Bravo Company rolled into the village with 2 MRAPs and an explosive ordnance disposal team. They cleared the IEDs, raided the safe house, detained the 6 insurgents without firing a shot. The villagers watched from doorways, silent, cautious, but not hostile. By sunset, American soldiers were buying bread from the village bakery, paying in crisp dollar bills. Children came out to watch, keeping distance but no longer hiding. An old man brought tea to the patrol base, 3 glass cups on a metal tray, still hot. Chen accepted it, knowing refusal would be an insult. Kareem sat on a plastic chair outside the patrol base, phone in hand, making another call, explaining what happened, spreading the word, building the next connection. But the real transformation didn't happen in Al-Hadid. It happened in the surrounding villages. Kareem kept calling. He contacted elders in 5 other villages within 10 kilometers, told them the same story. Al-Hadid tried something new. They cooperated with Americans. Americans stayed to protect them. Al-Qaeda left. No one was killed. The elder is still alive. His family is safe. It was a case study, a proof of concept, a working model. 3 days later, the elder from a village called Al-Nasr, the Victory, sent word he wanted to meet with American forces. He had information about a weapons cache. Kareem helped arrange the meeting, called his network of contacts, ensured the elder's message reached battalion through trusted channels. Al-Nasr provided the location of the cache. Americans cleared it. 37 mortar rounds, 14 RPGs, 200 pounds of homemade explosives. No shots fired. A week after that, a 3rd village reached out. Then a 4th. Within 2 months, 8 villages in Diyala province had made similar agreements. The pattern was always the same. Americans stayed for at least 7 days, provided security, bought local goods, paid cash for information. Elders who cooperated were not abandoned. Their families were protected. Insurgents who tried to retaliate found American forces waiting. The Diyala River Valley, which had been solidly hostile territory, began to fracture. Not every village flipped. Many remained insurgent strongholds. But enough shifted that al-Qaeda's logistics network started to collapse. They couldn't move weapons through friendly villages, couldn't stage attacks from areas where locals cooperated with Americans, couldn't intimidate elders who had American patrols living next door. Kareem's method wasn't taught in counterinsurgency manuals. It wasn't based on firepower or force protection or kinetic operations. It was based on something simpler and older: family networks, social obligations, and the understanding that trust is built through consistent presence, not brief visits. He called it MAD, Mutual Assured Defense. If Americans defended villages, villages would defend Americans. If either side broke the deal, both would suffer. It was stability through interdependence, the same principle that kept his father's generators running. Every part connected to every other part. The system only works if all components function together. Battalion intelligence analysts started calling it Kareem's network. They mapped his phone calls, traced the connections, tried to replicate his method with other interpreters. It didn't work. The other interpreters didn't have his list of numbers, didn't have 30 years of relationships built through engine repairs and family connections. They had language skills. Kareem had something deeper. He understood how Iraqi society actually functioned beneath the surface of sectarian violence and insurgent propaganda. By June 2007, Diyala province was still dangerous. EDs still exploded. Firefights still killed soldiers. But the trajectory had changed. Villages that had been enemy territory were becoming neutral. Neutral villages were becoming cooperative. Cooperative villages were providing the intelligence that allowed American and Iraqi forces to isolate the remaining insurgent cells. It wasn't a victory. It was a slow shift, measured in phone calls and family debts and cups of tea accepted from old men who'd decided, finally, that cooperation was less dangerous than resistance. Analysts at multinational core Iraq headquarters took notice. In August 2007, a major from the intelligence staff arrived at FOB Warhorse and interviewed Kareem for 2 hours. The major took notes, asked detailed questions, wanted to understand the methodology. How did he decide who to call? How did he verify information? How did he prevent insurgents from using the same network to track American movements? Kareem explained patiently, drew diagrams in his notebook, showed the major how family connections mapped onto tribal structures, how social obligations could be leveraged without coercion, how trust was built through consistency and reciprocity. The major wrote everything down. 3 months later, a new field manual appendix appeared. FM3-24.2, Annex D, Local Network Engagement and Counterinsurgency. It didn't mention Kareem by name. It called the method relationship-based intelligence development and recommended that interpreters maintain contact lists, that patrols establish sustained presence in cooperative villages, that commanders prioritize protecting local allies over kinetic operations. It was Kareem's method, formalized and distributed to every infantry battalion in Iraq. At Fort Benning, Georgia, instructors at the infantry school began teaching a case study called the Al-Hadid model in their counterinsurgency courses. They described how one village in Diyala province had shifted from hostile to cooperative, how that shift cascaded to surrounding areas, how sustained presence and local network engagement proved more effective than search and destroy missions. They didn't know it was Kareem. The case study credited local national interpreters and cooperative village elders. The innovation was presented as doctrine, not individual ingenuity. Kareem wouldn't have minded. When soldiers thanked him, he would shrug and say, "I just made some phone calls. Anyone could do it." But that wasn't true. Not anyone could do it. It required 30 years of relationships, deep understanding of how Iraqi society functioned, and the courage to defy protocol when protocol was failing. It required standing against a mud brick wall with mortars landing closer, phone pressed to ear, building a network one call at a time while soldiers questioned whether he was compromising their position. It required knowing when the system was broken, and having the tools to rebuild it from the inside. After the deployment ended in September 2007, Kareem returned to Bagba. He worked as a translator for another year, then left when the contract ended. The pay had been good, but the threats were escalating. Al-Qaeda had learned his name, learned what he'd done. Twice, men came to his father's shop asking for him. Twice, neighbors warned him not to come home. In 2008, he applied for a special immigrant visa, the program that allowed Iraqi interpreters who'd served with American forces to emigrate to the United States. The application took 14 months to process. He spent that time moving between relatives' houses, never staying more than 2 nights in one place. In November 2009, he flew to Dallas, Texas. He was 36 years old, carrying one suitcase and his worn notebook full of phone numbers that no longer meant anything in America. He found work at a car repair shop in Irving, Texas, a suburb northwest of Dallas. The owner, a Vietnamese immigrant named Thon Nguyen, hired him after watching him diagnose a transmission problem in 15 minutes. The same methodical approach he'd used on generators in his father's shop. The same step-by-step thinking he'd applied to family networks in Diyala province. He married in 2011, a woman named Layla, also Iraqi, also a refugee. They had 2 daughters. He worked at the same repair shop for 14 years, became a manager, trained younger mechanics, built a quiet life in a country where no one knew what he'd done in the war. He never spoke much about Iraq. When customers asked, hearing his accent, seeing his age, doing the math, he'd say, "I was a translator. I helped soldiers communicate with locals." Technically true, but it missed the scale of what he'd accomplished. He lives quietly in Irving today, still working at Nguyen's auto repair. His daughters are 12 and 9. They speak English without an accent, play soccer on weekends, know Iraq only through their father's occasional stories about their grandfather's engine repair shop. Kareem keeps his old notebook in a drawer in his bedroom. Sometimes, late at night when he can't sleep, He opens it and looks at the pages, names and phone numbers, lines connecting families and villages, the circuit diagram that had turned hostile territory into reluctant allies. Most of the people on those pages are dead now, killed in the sectarian violence that consumed Iraq after American forces withdrew. Some emigrated, scattered across the world. A few are still in Diyala province. Still living in the villages he'd connected through 47 phone calls on a single night in April 2007. He wonders, sometimes, if any of them remember. If the elders who made deals with Americans ever think about the translator who built the network that made those deals possible. If anyone in al-Hadid still tells the story of the night the mortars stopped because someone decided to make phone calls instead of waiting for orders. Probably not. Memory is short. Gratitude even shorter. The war is over. Most people just want to forget. But in a basement classroom at Fort Benning, instructors still teach the al-Hadid model to young lieutenants preparing for deployment. They don't mention Kareem's name. They don't know his story. But they teach his method. Build networks, leverage relationships, stay long enough to matter, understand that in counterinsurgency, family connections are more powerful than firepower. And somewhere in Texas, a mechanic with blistered hands and a worn notebook quietly fixes transmissions and remembers the night he turned a hostile village into an ally, one phone call at a time. There's a temptation to call stories like this myth, to think that wars are won by generals and strategic planning and overwhelming force, to believe that complex problems require complex solutions, but the truth is simpler and stranger. Wars are decided by people who understand systems, not just weapons systems or command systems, but human systems, social networks, family obligations, the invisible threads connecting people across tribal lines and sectarian divides. Kareem al-Dulaimi wasn't a brilliant tactician. He wasn't a trained intelligence operative. He was a mechanic who understood that every system has weak points and connection points, that if you know where to apply pressure, gently, persistently, through trusted channels, you can repair what seems irreparably broken. His father told him once, "Every machine is a system. You can't fix one part without understanding how it connects to everything else." Kareem didn't win the war in Iraq, but he proved something more valuable, that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a rifle, or a drone, or a battalion of soldiers. Sometimes it's a cheap Nokia phone, a list of family connections, and the understanding that trust is built one conversation at a time. And in a war where trust was the scarcest resource, that made all the difference. So what would you have done in Kareem's position? Would you have made those phone calls, knowing each one could compromise the patrol's position? Would you have defied protocol because you believed family networks mattered more than military doctrine? Would you have trusted that social pressure could stop mortars when firepower couldn't? What shocked you most about this story? That one translator's phone calls turned a hostile village into an ally, or that the method was later taught at Fort Benning without anyone knowing his name? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that the most important stories of war are the ones no one tells, share this with someone who thinks they know what courage looks like. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is make a phone call.